The bell tower tolled for the 13th time, a mournful chime that echoed across the stone walls of the royal court and into the weeping streets of the capital. Flags drooped at half-mast. Black ribbons fluttered from every window. The kingdom mourned their king, the last monarch of the old bloodline, laid to rest beneath the obsidian slab of the ancestral tomb. But as the smoke of morning fires still drifted above the rooftops, the noble council convened behind closed doors. Their black cloaks swirled as they spoke in hushed tones, not about grief but urgency. The kingdom needed stability. A sovereign. A crowned voice to call out the sunrise and seal treaties with wax and steel. And so the whispers turned to names, and from the circle of velvet-robed advisors rose the one they all agreed upon, not because of heritage or prophecy, but because she was the most convenient choice. Lyris. She stood tall before them, regal and striking, with eyes that gleamed not from sorrow but from calculation. Her golden hair was pulled back in an elegant twist, the very image of control and grace. Her deep crimson gown trailed behind her like flowing wine, and when she bowed before the council, she did so with the smooth, trained elegance of someone who had practiced it 100 times before in her dressing mirror. The council called it fate. The people were told it was legacy. That she was the stepdaughter of the late king, raised within the palace walls, trained by scholars and tutors handpicked by the court itself. She had dined with generals, curtsied beside foreign emissaries, and stood at the old king's right hand during festival parades. Lyris of House Veland, daughter of the Queen Dowager Elanra, has been chosen, announced Lord Verrill before the mourning crowd gathered at the grand steps. She shall wear the crown instead of blood as the royal seal approves, and in the name of unity, peace and future strength. From the crowd, hundreds cheered. Perhaps not from love, but from exhaustion. The past months of illness and instability had worn the people thin. They did not want justice. They wanted normalcy. A face they recognized, one with eloquence, beauty, and confidence. Someone to silence the ache of uncertainty. But not all voices joined the applause. At the edge of the steps, near the base of the carved griffin statues, stood Cyril. Cloaked in pale gray, she blended easily into the stone. Her hands were clasped tightly before her, sleeves hiding the nervous twist of her fingers. She watched her stepsister ascend the platform with the poise of a born queen, watched their shared father beam with pride beside her. Not a single glance was spared for Cyril. She had not been summoned to the council. No one had asked her to stand beside the new queen or to bear witness to the decision that would forever reshape her world. The same blood that ran through her veins had not been enough. Not when her mother, a soft-spoken court musician long passed from fever, had left no powerful name behind. Not when her only inheritance was a pair of worn shoes and a shelf of poetry books. The court whispered that Cyril had always been too quiet, too plain, too forgettable to rule. They called her a delicate thing, more likely to fade under pressure than rise to lead. So Cyril stood in silence as her stepmother, Elanra, now the Queen Dowager, lifted her chin and declared with voice ringing through the square, "The line of succession is now sealed. The crown rests upon the rightful head, and the old ways shall yield to a brighter reign." The seal-bearer stepped forward with the velvet pillow. Upon it rested the crown of the sovereign son, gleaming with sapphires rimmed with fire gold. Lyris reached out, and the symbol of rule was placed upon her brow. The crowd erupted in cheer, but Cyril watched as a single raven circled above, cawing once before disappearing into the sky. A chill passed over her despite the warmth of the morning. Inside her chest something shifted. Not envy. Not even pain. Something quieter, deeper. Like a seed waking beneath the earth. That evening, the palace filled with celebration. Servants rushed down the halls with trays of fruit, wine, and roasted meats. Musicians played in the marble halls. Guests paraded in silk and pearls, praising the new queen, drinking to the reign that had yet to begin. Cyril sat alone on the garden steps. She held no goblet, wore no jewels. Her dress was a simple weave of moss green, its sleeves repaired more times than she could count. She watched the shadows move across the hedges, her feet curled beneath her as the sounds of music drifted through the night air. Behind her, laughter erupted. She turned to see Lyris passing through the hedge gate with a coterie of courtiers. Their eyes slid past Cyril as if she were part of the scenery. Lyris's voice rang out above the others, polished and cold. "I will send for tailors from the eastern provinces," she said. "The old court robes are faded. I want something striking for my first address. Something that says rebirth." One of the nobles chuckled. "Your Grace, might I suggest something woven with phoenix feathers?" Lyris smiled. "Perhaps. It's time we set the past to fire." They swept past. Not one of them looked back. Later that night, Cyril walked the halls where no one waited for her. The chambermaids passed her without bowing. The guard at the east gate barely nodded. She stepped into the royal library, unlit save for a single candle near the back, and traced her fingers over the leather-bound volumes her mother used to read aloud. Her voice, long silenced by illness, had been like music in those halls. Few remembered her now. Near the hearth she paused. On the mantel was a small iron box, once her mother's. Her fingers hovered over it before she withdrew them. That box, she knew, contained a letter meant for the next queen. It had been sealed years ago by the late king's hand. But the council had not opened it. No one mentioned it during the coronation. And Cyril, silent and overlooked, was the only one who remembered. Outside the stars shifted. A wind stirred the banners. The torchlight flickered. In the heart of the stone palace, where power now wore a new name, Cyril closed her eyes and whispered not a wish, but a promise. The throne of Eldor was carved from dawn stone, a pale gold-veined marble that shimmered when touched by sunlight. It stood alone beneath the dome of the celestial hall, where stained-glass windows spilled fractured color across the white floors and rose-quartz columns. Above the throne, suspended by ancient enchantment, hovered the royal seal, a disk of polished obsidian encircled by sun motifs and moon runes, said to glow with ethereal light when a rightful monarch sat below it. But the seal did not glow. Not when Lyris ascended the throne after her coronation. Not when she gave her first speech before the court. Not even when she placed her hand over her heart and swore her lineage by the name of the ancestors. It hung, silent and dark, like a closed eye. The court magisters were quick to explain it away. Perhaps the seal is dulled from years of disuse, said one. The magic has slumbered too long, said another. It needs time to awaken. Lyris, always poised, nodded with serenity and dismissed their concerns. Let the seal sleep, she said. The people are already waking. But outside the circle of royal charm and silk-furred diplomacy, the whispers began. In the laundry courtyards, chambermaids folded linens with quiet tongues wagging. In the stables, stable hands traded stories between brushing coats and refilling troughs. In the shadowed corners of the town square, cobblers and breadwives murmured to each other in sidelong glances. Why does the seal stay dark? Is she truly queen? Within the palace walls, Lyris's smile grew tighter. Her temper, once concealed behind practiced gentleness, began to flare. She ordered the drapes in the celestial hall changed, the seal cleaned with scented oils, and instructed musicians to play louder when she entered a room. But no amount of flourish could hide what remained unchanged. Meanwhile, Cyril passed through the halls as a shadow. She had not been banished nor exiled, no, that would have drawn questions. Instead, she had been quietly reassigned, her chamber stripped of silks and reclothed with coarse linens. The maids addressed her with polite distance. Lady Cyril became simply Miss, and then eventually nothing at all. She was sent to work in the royal kitchens. The hearths there were always burning and the stone floors were always warm. It smelled of rosemary and simmering broth, of steam and scorched bread. Cyril kept her head down and her hands busy, peeling root vegetables, sorting spices, and kneading dough with the quiet strength of someone used to being unnoticed. But the kitchen had its secrets too. Below the bakery ovens, beneath a rusted iron grate long covered by crates of dried herbs, Cyril discovered a staircase. She hadn't meant to find it, only dropped a bundle of thyme that slipped through a crack. When she pulled the herbs free, she saw the stone handle. Dust choked the latch, but when she pressed it, it gave a low groan and revealed the steps. Curiosity guided her down. The air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of old books and earth. Cobwebs draped across the ceiling, catching in her hair as she descended. At the bottom of the steps lay a stone cellar, larger than the kitchens above, with shelves of sealed scrolls, tarnished candle holders, and leather-bound volumes marked in ink faded nearly to nothing. She lit a torch and moved slowly through the chamber. The floor was carved with symbols, moons and phases, starbursts, trees with roots tangled in runes. On one wall hung a tapestry of a crowned woman in a green robe, her hands lifted to a glowing seal above her head. And around her neck, plain and clear, was a pendant, a silver disc engraved with a crescent and sunburst. Cyril's breath caught. Her fingers rose to her chest. She wore that very pendant. It had been her mother's. The only thing left to her after her death. No one had ever explained its meaning. But here, in the shadows of the cellar, it blazed in her mind like fire. She reached out and ran her fingers along the embroidery on the tapestry. The stitching was so fine it seemed to shimmer even in torchlight. She stared at the woman's face, soft, calm, with deep-set eyes and a quiet strength. a face not unlike her own. She wasn't sure how long she stood there. That night, when she returned to the servant quarters, she didn't sleep. Her hands trembled. Her heart pounded in a rhythm she didn't understand. She opened the pendant and stared at the inside, nothing, just smooth silver. But now it seemed to hum softly when she touched it. In the coming days, Cyril returned to the cellar again and again. She read what scrolls she could decipher. Most were in Old Eldarin, a tongue she barely remembered from her childhood studies. But she recognized names, symbols, phrases like the chosen thread, seal-bearer, and daughter of the green flame. One scroll depicted the ritual of coronation, how the royal seal was said to react not to bloodline alone, but to truth. The seal, born from the old magic of the first queens, was tied to a line of rulers whose power came not from conquest or marriage but from soul mark, an echo of something deeper than title. And only the soul-bound could awaken the seal. Cyril's hands trembled. She held the scroll against her chest. That evening, as she moved through the halls with a basket of oranges, she passed the throne room. Lyris stood inside, surrounded by courtiers, their laughter echoing as she posed beneath the seal, trying on yet another regal cloak embroidered with foxes and roses. Still the seal did not glow. From behind a marble column, Cyril watched, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. The pendant beneath her apron pulsed faintly. She looked down. When she lifted the chain above her collar, the silver disc shimmered briefly, casting a pale light onto her hand. And in that moment, the seal above the throne flickered. Just once. Like a heartbeat. None inside noticed. But Cyril did. She tucked the pendant quickly back beneath her apron and fled the corridor. The next morning, the court buzzed with confusion. The royal seal had been seen to twitch, the guards said. Some thought it a trick of light. Others called it an omen. Lyris waved it off with a forced smile and ordered the draperies changed again. Perhaps silver silks, she said, to better reflect the dawn. In the kitchen, Cyril's thoughts churned. The pendant, the scrolls, the seal, they all pointed toward a truth buried long ago. Her mother had not been simply a court musician. She had known something. Been someone. The pendant, passed to Cyril, was more than an heirloom. It was a key. Each day she spent kneading dough and scrubbing pans, her heart burned a little brighter. She could not speak yet, she did not have proof strong enough to challenge the council or the queen. But she kept reading, kept returning to the cellar, following the threads her mother had left behind. And as the whispers in the palace grew louder, Cyril began to listen to the silence between them. Not all in the court were loyal to Lyris. Not all were blind. And in dark corners of the castle, old voices were beginning to stir. Cyril had not slept. The revelation of the seal's flicker still pulsed in her chest like an unspoken promise. She moved through the castle corridors the next morning like a ghost beneath the sun. The palace was already humming with confused speculation, servants whispering over trays of gooseberry tarts, guards muttering near the portcullis. Everyone was trying to guess why the royal seal had stirred for a brief second when it had remained stubbornly dark for the new queen. But Cyril said nothing. Not about the pendant. Not about the cellar. Not yet. That evening, when the kitchen settled into their usual quiet hum and the head cook's voice grew hoarse from shouting, Cyril slipped away. She carried a basket of stale rolls, a convenient excuse should she be stopped. But the guards rarely noticed kitchen girls unless they were in the way. She passed the main hall, where music played again for Lyris's endless celebrations, and crept down the servants' stair. At the back of the pantry, she moved the crate of dried rosemary and thyme, revealing the stone trapdoor beneath. The iron handle was still stiff, but she had greased it the day before. With a deep breath and a final glance over her shoulder, she lifted it open and descended. The air in the cellar had changed. It felt charged, heavier, as if it were listening. Torch in hand, she made her way across the carved stones to the tapestry of the green-robed woman. The pendant under her apron felt warm against her skin. She pulled it out now, clutching it in one hand as her eyes scanned the room. There, just below the tapestry at the edge of a moss-covered arch, was a stone disc set into the wall, identical in size and shape to her pendant. Heart-thudding, Cyril reached out and pressed the silver pendant against the stone. It slid into place with a sound like soft thunder. The wall shuddered. A grinding noise echoed through the cellar as centuries-old dust trickled from the edges of the arch slowly, silently. The wall slid open, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. The air that spilled out was cooler, sharper, as though sealed in magic. A faint light glowed from within, casting gentle golden reflections onto the stone floor. She stepped inside. The chamber was smaller than the first cellar, but filled with warmth, like a memory held too tightly. Wooden shelves curved along the walls, stacked with scrolls and wrapped books bound in faded green leather. Symbols were etched into the ceiling, a sun rising between twin mountains, a crown wreathed in leaves and a star blooming into flame. At the center of the room stood a table. Upon it lay an open scroll weighted with 2 river stones. As she approached, Cyril saw the crest stamped at the top, a silver tree rooted into a crown. Her breath caught. She had seen that symbol once before, on her mother's favorite ring, worn only on feast days. She lifted the scroll gently, careful not to disturb the brittle edges. The ink had faded but was still legible. It was a marriage contract between King Elderic of House Vale and Lady Myrti of House Thorn. Her mother's name. Her knees nearly gave out beneath her. She lowered herself to the ground and spread the scroll across her lap, reading again and again. There could be no doubt. This was no coincidence. The seal, the pendant, the hidden room, all of it pointed to one truth her stepmother had never dared utter. Her mother had once been promised to the king. But what had happened? She looked to the surrounding shelves and rose shakily to her feet, searching through the scrolls. Each bore her mother's crest. Letters written in her hand. Herbal recipes, notes on healing practices, diagrams of ancient rituals. But then, tucked between a ledger of palace expenditures and a stack of dried lavender, she found another scroll, this one sealed with red wax, its edges still sharp. She broke it open and read. It was dated nearly 20 years ago, just before the king's coronation. In it, Myrti, her mother, described the betrothal. A political union forged by the High Council to bind 2 powerful bloodlines. She had not loved Elderic, but she had agreed to the match out of duty, believing she could be a wise and kind queen. But something had changed. Just before the wedding, the letter explained, another noblewoman had arrived at court, Lady Calvina, widow of a foreign duke, beautiful, ambitious, and desperate to secure power for her daughter Lyris. Somehow, Calvina had wormed her way into the king's ear, whispering poison. Within weeks, the betrothal was dissolved, the council silenced, and Myrti quietly removed from court life under the pretense of illness. Exiled. Disgraced. Myrti had returned to her quiet village life with Cyril in her arms. No one knew the truth. No one was meant to. Until now. Cyril's hands trembled as she held the letter to her chest. She sank to her knees once more, overwhelmed. Her mother, her true heritage, had been buried. And Lyris sat on the throne that might have once been her birthright. But it wasn't about the throne. Not really. It was about the lie. The deception that had erased her mother's name from the palace walls. That had silenced generations of women in favor of those who smiled prettier or played power better. Her mother had been swept aside so that someone like Lyris could wear a crown that didn't belong to her. Cyril thought of the royal seal. Of its flicker. Of her mother's pendant warming against her chest. And suddenly she understood. This room, this hidden place, this was not just a vault. It was a message. Her mother had left these traces not by accident, but as a thread for her daughter to follow. The scrolls were not only memories but weapons. Truths sharpened against the smooth edge of forgetting. She stood slowly, folding the scrolls and tucking them into her satchel. She would return them. Study them. Learn everything. Then she would decide what to do with them. As she turned to leave, she paused one last time and looked around the room. The air still glowed faintly as if acknowledging her presence. The pendant in the stone began to warm again. She reached for it, and the wall slid silently back into place, sealing the room once more. She climbed the stairs quietly, returning to the pantry unnoticed. That night, as music echoed from the throne room and Lyris paraded in yet another brocade gown before a silent seal, Cyril sat in the flickering candlelight of the scullery and unfolded her mother's letters one by one. Her fingers traced each line, each word. She did not cry. Not yet. Instead, she began to memorize the crest of the silver tree and crown. She began to map the language of the old rites. She copied each page in secret, hiding them beneath the straw of her cot, behind loose stones, in the empty shell of an old bread oven. She was not ready to speak. But when she did, the whole kingdom would hear her. The whispers, once soft as a drifting breeze, had become impossible to ignore. At first, the nobles had chalked it up to nerves. After all, ruling a kingdom was no easy burden, especially after the death of a beloved monarch. But as the days passed, Queen Lyris's behavior grew too wild, too sharp-edged to be excused. She smiled less and snapped more. Her voice, once honeyed, now rang through the palace like broken glass. Her fingers, once adorned with silks and pearls, trembled even when wrapped around a goblet of wine. And always, her eyes flicked toward the royal seal. That damn thing. It sat above the throne, embedded in marble, a hand-sized disk of ancient stone infused with the magic of the first monarchs. Carved with the sigils of the original line and crowned by a ring of jewels that glowed only when touched by true blood, it had passed judgment on every ruler for 500 years. For Lyris it had stayed cold. The day after Cyril's discovery in the cellar, the queen summoned every mage, healer and historian within reach. She ordered the chamber doors locked and had the seal examined. They tested its magic, its stone, even the positioning of the sun at the time of coronation. All findings were the same. The seal was working perfectly. It simply did not recognize Lyris. That was when the punishments began. Cyril saw it first in the kitchens. The new pastry maid was dismissed, then flogged for serving a tart too bitter. A seamstress, late delivering the queen's new ball gown, was slapped across the face in the great hall and sent home without pay. A scullery girl who dropped a silver plate was accused of sabotage and locked away. Each day brought a new fury. The queen lashed out not just at staff, but at courtiers, ladies-in-waiting, and even her own advisors. "She's unraveling," whispered Dara the older cook to Cyril as they rolled dough one morning. "Like thread from a rotten hem." But Cyril only listened in silence, heart heavy with a truth she now dared not speak. The pendant, a small innocent thing strung on a silver chain, burned like fire beneath her blouse. Ever since she'd unearthed the scrolls in the hidden chamber, she had worn it constantly, tucked close to her chest. She never took it off, not even to sleep. And now someone knew. One night, as she swept the great stairwell alone, Cyril caught the queen watching her from the shadows. No fanfare. No announcement. Just Lyris standing in the upper gallery, veil drawn back, lips pressed into a near snarl. "You have something that isn't yours," she said, voice low but clear. Cyril bowed quickly, heart leaping. "Your Majesty?" Lyris descended the steps slowly, dress rustling like dry leaves. Her crown sat unevenly on her head, as though it too were reluctant to remain. She came to stand directly before Cyril, who could barely draw breath beneath her gaze. "You walk lighter these days," Lyris murmured. "And you look me in the eye more often than you should." Cyril dropped her gaze, unsure if it was guilt or growing strength that had been seen. "There are stories about you," Lyris continued, circling her like a cat. "That you whisper to walls. That you disappear beneath the palace at night. That you wear something silver on a chain." Cyril said nothing. The queen stopped just behind her, close enough to feel the heat of her breath. "If you find something that does not belong to you," she said, "and if that thing once belonged to a traitor, it is your duty to hand it over." Cyril clenched her jaw. "Of course, Your Majesty." Lyris stared a moment longer, then swept away. That night, Cyril did not sleep. She hid the pendant in a hollowed-out loaf of stale bread, then placed it behind the hearth in the scullery, where the fire's heat might ward off prying hands. When she next checked on it, the silver still glowed softly, unharmed. But something else had changed. The queen's rages grew more violent. She began holding private audiences with old warlocks and foreign alchemists. Smoke often poured from the tower chamber where the seal lay. Rumors spread that she had tried to force the relic to glow with blood offerings, cutting her own palm, then another girl's. Nothing worked. The nobles grew wary. One afternoon, as Cyril tended the herb garden in the rear courtyard, the royal healer approached. He was a tall, thin man with pale eyes and a crooked cane, and he had always treated Cyril kindly, asking her name, requesting herbs with please and thank you, unlike the rest. He knelt beside her now and picked a sprig of balm. "Do you know what this is used for?" he asked. "Rest," she answered. "To calm the mind." He nodded. "The queen refuses it." She glanced at him. "Should I gather more?" He gave a tight smile. "No. But I will say something to you that no one else will." He looked around, then leaned in. "The seal will not change its mind." Cyril swallowed. Then, "If it remains dark," he whispered, "the queen's claim dies with it." He stood without another word and walked away, leaving Cyril trembling with realization. The kingdom's magic, though mysterious, did not waver. It did not yield to force or fear. It only responded to truth. Which meant, somewhere in the bones of this castle, the truth still waited. And it lived inside her. That evening, Cyril returned to the hidden chamber. She waited until midnight, when most of the court slumbered or drank themselves senseless. Beneath the trapdoor, past the secret wall, the air felt even thicker. Like something was waiting. She unsealed a new scroll from her mother. This one was short, only a single sheet. Read. "If you read this, my heart, you must know, the truth cannot be buried forever. Not in stone. Not in silence. You were born of fire and kindness. Your blood sings with both. Do not let them tell you otherwise. Underneath the writing was the silver tree and crown. She held the scroll for a long time, hands shaking. Above her, somewhere in the high tower, sat a queen who clung to a throne with nails and lies. But the stones beneath her feet, the earth itself, refused her. Cyril, kneeling before the ancient scrolls, no longer felt like a servant. She felt like a spark waiting to catch. The next morning, as the sun rose over the eastern towers, the royal seal remained unchanged. But inside the scullery, behind the bread oven, a silver pendant shimmered softly. Not with magic, but with memory. And that memory would change everything. The summons came at dawn. It began with a horn's low cry echoing through the stone corridors of the palace, followed by the pounding of boots and the clipped voices of guards announcing the council's decision. All servants were to gather in the central courtyard. Nobles too. Even the queen. Cyril, rising from her straw cot in the servants' wing, sensed it before she heard it. The air felt tight, as if the walls themselves were bracing. She dressed quickly and hid the pendant once more beneath her collar, securing it with a silent prayer. When she stepped into the sunlight, the courtyard was already alive with movement. Men and women crowded the square in formal robes, armor clinking, fans fluttering, whispers flying like birds between them. At the center stood the sacred brazier. It had not been lit in over 2 decades. Forged from obsidian and silver, the brazier was said to have been touched by the fire spirit of the first king himself. When truth was questioned, when lineage was doubted, the flames were called. Not even the royal family could escape its judgment. A blood rite. A test older than any crown. Lyris arrived last. Draped in gold and deep crimson, her crown gleaming, her face painted into a mask of calm. But Cyril saw the tension in her hands, the slight twitch of her jaw as she climbed the dais. Beside the brazier stood 3 figures: the royal healer, the high flamekeeper in robes of burnt orange, and Lord Alric, the head of the noble council. Between them, a ceremonial blade rested on velvet, and a scroll bearing the oath of bloodlines lay unfurled. The crowd parted to let Cyril forward. She did not move until the guards gestured. Her feet felt leaden. Yet when she stepped into the center, the whispers fell to silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Lord Alric raised his voice. "We are gathered under ancient law. The royal seal has failed to recognize Her Majesty Queen Lyris. This test is summoned not to shame but to clarify. By flame and blood the truth will rise." Lyris gave a sharp nod. Her lips moved but no sound escaped. "The test shall begin with Her Majesty." The queen extended her hand. The blade sliced across her palm with practiced ease, and red blood welled at once. She held it above the brazier and her fingers trembled slightly. When the drop struck the coals there was a hiss, then nothing. The brazier smoked faintly. The flame rose sluggishly, orange and dull. No flicker. No blue. No change. A murmur rippled through the nobles. Lyris turned away quickly, binding her hand with silk. Her face showed nothing, but her steps faltered as she returned to her place. Then came Cyril. The girl who had served soups and washed linens now stood before royalty. The silence deepened. The flamekeeper motioned for her to extend her hand. "Do you consent, child?" he asked, voice gentle. Cyril nodded. Her throat was dry but her hands did not shake. The blade kissed her skin. Her blood too was red, only red, but the moment it touched the sacred coals the fire changed. It did not flicker. It leapt. A rush of blue and white flames soared upward, lighting the courtyard with a sudden brilliance that made many shield their eyes. The brazier roared, alive with color, and a low tone rang out like a bell from deep within the flame itself. Then from the tower above the royal seal chimed. Not fully. Not a blazing song of succession. But it flickered. A pale light, faint and cautious, shimmered through its stones. Just enough to be seen. Just enough to ignite chaos. Gasps broke across the crowd. Some covered their mouths. Others stepped forward in disbelief. Lord Alric looked to the flame, then to Cyril, then to Lyris, whose face had gone rigid. The queen strode back to the center. Her voice came sharp. "This is a trick." No one answered. "She has dabbled in things forbidden," Lyris cried, pointing at Cyril. "This is witchcraft. Some spell has been cast, she's bewitched the flame, the seal, the court." The high flamekeeper raised his hand. "Your Majesty, the flame cannot be bewitched. It recognizes only blood." "You lie." The nobles flinched. Even Lord Alric's jaw stiffened. "I demand a delay," Lyris snapped. "A full investigation. This girl, this servant, has long been drawn to dark things. She disappears at night. She speaks to herself. Who knows what poison she has poured into the minds of this council? She has poured no poison, the royal healer said, stepping forward. She has only told the truth. Lyris turned to him aghast. You stand with her? I stand with what the flame has spoken. The queen's eyes landed on Cyril once more, blazing now not with power but with something more dangerous, fear. This is not over, she spat. Cyril held her ground. No, she said quietly. It's only just begun. That night the palace burned with rumor. Some said Cyril was the true heir all along, born of a secret marriage between the king and a woman of the old bloodline. Others whispered that her pendant bore the mark of a lineage long believed erased. Some believed it all a test by the gods, sent to challenge the court's pride. Servants avoided the queen's wing. Guards spoke in hushed tones. Nobles began writing letters to distant relatives, asking what they knew of Cyril's mother. And in the tower the royal seal glowed faintly, pulsing, like a heart waking from long slumber. The sun had long dipped beneath the hills when Cyril crept quietly through the corridor beneath the east wing, the hem of her simple servant gown damp from the stone floors. In her palm she clutched the pendant, now strung on a braided thread and hidden beneath her collar. Every instinct told her this meeting could end in ruin. But if she turned back now, everything would stay as it was. The seal would remain dim. Her mother's name would stay buried beneath layers of rewritten history. And Lyris would remain on the throne she was never meant to claim. She reached the edge of the old winter garden, now overgrown and out of use since the king's passing. The moonlight filtered through the cracked glass panes overhead, casting soft silver light on the crumbling statues and the wide archway where a tall figure stood waiting. He didn't wear his princely cloak tonight. Instead, he stood cloaked in a traveler's mantle, the hood lowered to reveal a familiar face, one that had once watched her quietly across the royal court, but never approached until now. Prince Cale, Cyril whispered. He turned. Cyril. She hadn't expected the sound of her name and his voice to land so heavily in her chest. It had always been the other girl, or the quiet one, whenever she was spoken of, if she was mentioned at all. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice soft but steady. I've watched too long in silence, he replied. And silence, I think, is how lies grow best. He gestured to the stone bench beneath the blooming wisteria, and together they sat. For a moment, the scent of flowers dulled the sharp ache of fear rising in Cyril's chest. Then she reached into her bodice and pulled out the pendant. It was my mother's, she said. Before she disappeared from court. Before my father married Lyris's mother. I thought it was just something pretty, but I found this in the old cellar. She placed the pendant in his palm, then unfolded the copy she had made of one of the scrolls. It showed the sigil, not of her father's house but of the first royal bloodline, thought to have died out generations ago. Cale traced the outline with his thumb. His jaw tightened. I remember your mother, he said after a pause. When I was a child. She was kind. She once found me crying after I fell from a pony. She sat beside me and told me a story of a fox who tricked a king into giving up his crown. She made me laugh even as my arm was bruising. Cyril swallowed. No one ever spoke of her mother now. No one dared. She was banished when I was little, Cyril said. The story they told was that she had offended the king. But I think Lyris's mother had already begun her web by then. Cale's gaze did not waver. You believe your mother was the rightful queen? I don't know if she wanted power, Cyril whispered. But I know she was silenced. And I know the seal won't glow for Lyris. Cale nodded slowly. My father arranged the betrothal between Lyris and me when I was barely 16. I was told she would make a clever queen. But cleverness without truth is a kind of rot. Silence stretched between them. Cyril looked down at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. I don't want the throne, Cale, she said. I want her lies to end. I want my mother's name restored. I want peace, not power. Which is precisely why you deserve it more than she ever did, he replied. She looked up. There was no irony in his face, no flattery. Just a clear conviction born not of pity but recognition. I will speak with the council, Cale said. But it will be dangerous. Lyris still has powerful allies and she'll spin this as treason if she can. I'm used to being seen as nothing, Cyril said. It makes it easier to move unseen. He smiled, but it was tinged with sorrow. Not for long, I think. They parted before the guards began their rounds. He promised to meet her again in 3 days, beneath the west cloister's bell tower. She returned to her chamber, her heart pounding not with fear, but something dangerously close to hope. The next morning Cale returned to the court, his face unreadable. Whispers followed him down the marbled halls. Some wondered at his long absence from the feast chamber the night before, others speculated whether the rumors of his coldness toward Lyris were true. He neither confirmed nor denied anything. But that afternoon, the Chancellor of the Royal Council received a sealed letter written in Cale's own hand, requesting a formal review of the seal's refusal and the potential legitimacy of alternative lineage claims, backed by ancient law. Lyris's scream could be heard 3 corridors away. Over the next few days the palace grew tense. Courtiers began choosing their words more carefully. Rumors spread of hidden scrolls, of symbols unseen for generations, of a pendant that glowed in fire. The kitchens whispered. The stables muttered. Even the royal healer was said to have locked himself in his quarters for hours, rereading the old rites. Meanwhile, Cale kept his distance from Lyris. When she summoned him, he replied through servants. When she cornered him in the garden and demanded loyalty, he met her eyes and said, "Loyalty belongs to truth, not tyranny." On the 3rd night, Cyril crept once again to the bell tower. This time, Cale came with a bundle wrapped in velvet, an old decree signed by the former king in his own hand. It confirmed that Cyril's mother had once been intended as queen, but was dismissed after a falsified accusation, never formally tried. "We found this in the king's private library," Cale said. "Locked in a chest behind a false panel. Only the head archivist had access, and he'd been paid to forget it ever existed." Cyril stared at the scroll, her breath catching. The paper was brittle but the ink clear. Her mother's name, delicate and looped. Her father's signature. And beneath it the seal, smaller than the royal seal but unmistakable. "You can take this to the tribunal," Cale said. "But I will stand beside you. Not behind. Not above. Beside." She nodded, unable to speak. "And if the seal glows for you," he added more quietly, "then all the lies begin to fall." That evening, as the sun set in blazing orange, a crowd began gathering in the great hall. It was an informal meeting. Official tribunals were rare, but the tension in the air felt no less sacred. Cale arrived first, not in princely robes but in plain court attire. Behind him, Cyril walked with head held high. Gasps rippled through the room. Lyris turned pale. "You dare bring a kitchen girl to a matter of state?" she spat. Cale looked at her calmly. "She has more claim than most at this table." Cyril stepped forward, unwrapping the velvet bundle and laying the old decree on the table. "This is my mother's name," she said. "This is her promised place. This is the truth you buried." Lyris lunged for the scroll, but the head of the council blocked her. The chancellor examined it. The royal healer confirmed the handwriting. Murmurs turned to a rising tide. Cale turned to the crowd. "I was promised to a queen. Not a deceiver." For a long moment no one spoke. Then from the back of the hall, a court scribe stepped forward. "I remember her," he said. "Cyril's mother. She used to sing to the gardeners while she planted roses. The king smiled more in those days." Another voice, the laundress. "She used to share her bread with the orphans, even when the kitchens were nearly bare." And another, from an old guard, "I saw Lyris's mother whisper to the king the night before Cyril's mother vanished." The tide had turned. By night's end the court was split. Some still clung to Lyris out of fear. Others shifted their allegiance to Cyril, not out of ambition but out of recognition. The truth had taken root, and though it had been long buried, it had not died. Cyril returned to her quarters with Cale walking beside her. He did not speak until they reached the old door. "You don't have to be queen," he said. "Not if you don't want to." She turned to him, her face solemn. "But if I don't, someone else like her might be." He nodded. And then for the first time he reached for her hand, not with ceremony but with quiet strength. Together they stood in the hallway, the light of the lantern flickering between them. Tomorrow the seal would be tested once more. And this time, Cyril would walk toward it not as a servant, but as someone who had remembered the truth, and chosen to raise it from the ashes. The coronation was not supposed to happen again. After the seal refused her the first time, after the whispers grew louder, after Cyril stood before the council with truth in her hands and blue flame in her blood, Lyris should have relinquished her claim. But power, once tasted, does not easily release its hold. And Lyris had spent too many years grooming her image, silencing her enemies, and weaving her web of lies to let it all unravel now. So the invitations went out again. This time not with public fanfare, but in sealed envelopes delivered under cloaks of darkness. The official notice said it was a private reaffirmation of her crown before the royal elders, necessary due to baseless accusations and disruption of protocol. But in hushed corners of the court, rumors stirred of something darker. An ancient rite meant not to honor the gods but to bend them. Cyril heard of the new ceremony 2 days before it was set to take place. One of the kitchen boys had overheard a priest muttering about cleansing fire and binding blood. When Cyril confronted the royal healer, he would not meet her gaze. "She's called priests from beyond the borders," he admitted, wringing his hands. "Not from our temple. From the forgotten sects, those who work in shadows. She means to force the seal." "Can the seal be forced?" Cyril asked. He shook his head. "Not without consequences." The morning of the ceremony dawned with an unnatural stillness. No birdsong greeted the sunrise. The clouds, though thin, did not move. It was as if the sky itself held its breath. The royal hall was draped in crimson. Banners bearing Lyris's emblem, golden roses entwined with serpents, hung high above the assembled nobles. The traditional symbols of the ancestors were missing. In their place stood tall, unfamiliar statues, their eyes blindfolded, their hands holding bowls filled with black sand. Cyril, forbidden from attending, had been locked in her chamber the night before. But the guards outside her door had once served her mother. When she pressed the pendant to the lock, they opened it without a word. They did not speak, only bowed and stepped aside. She crept through the side passages, her heart pounding, until she reached the high alcove above the throne room. From there, hidden behind carved screens, she could see everything. Lyris stood before the throne, dressed not in royal blue or white, but in deep violet, stitched with crimson thread. Around her neck was a chain set with a black stone, one that pulsed faintly with its own sickly light. Behind her, 6 priests in ash-gray robes began to chant, their voices low and discordant. Cyril felt her stomach twist. These were not the chants of the palace temple. These were older, hungrier. The royal seal was brought forward by 2 servants. It rested on a velvet cushion, a golden circlet set with a clear central gem. The gem was said to glow with the light of the gods when it touched the true heir's brow. Lyris lifted it with trembling hands. Her smile was thin, brittle. "I am queen," she said, though no one had asked her. "I am chosen." She placed the circlet on her head. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the stone in the center of the seal pulsed a deep red. A crack spidered across its surface. Gasps rippled through the room. The priests chanted louder. The black sand in their bowls began to rise as if caught in a storm wind. Lyris's smile faltered. "Continue the rite," she shouted. One of the elders stepped forward. "This is not the way of the crown." "Silence," she barked, voice wild. "You will recognize me. The gods will yield." She threw her arms wide. The priests poured the black sand in a circle around her. Smoke began to rise from the ground, the air thick with a scent of burning iron. Lyris raised her hands and the seal glowed again, this time with an angry, unnatural light. Then with a sound like shattering ice, the stone exploded. Shards flew through the air. The seal, the sacred symbol of royal right, burst into fragments. One piece struck a priest's cheek, another lodged in the wall near the throne. The rest scattered across the floor like broken stars. The room fell dead silent. And then, thunder. It rolled through the stone walls like a growl from the earth itself. Outside, clouds boiled over the sky. A thick darkness fell over the palace, though the hour was still early afternoon. The elder who had spoken stepped forward again, now with renewed strength. "The gods have spoken," he said. His voice rang out with clarity. "And they have rejected you." "No," Lyris shrieked. "They fear me because I am powerful. I'm meant to rule." The seal was flawed. "Bring another." "There is no other," the chancellor said coldly. "There has only ever been one." Lyris turned in a circle, searching the faces around her for support. But where once were nods and deference, now she saw only wary eyes, pursed lips, and silent judgment. And then someone shouted, "Guards! Seize her!" But before anyone moved, a second tremor rocked the floor. A piece of the ceiling cracked and fell, smashing into the aisle. The statues with their blindfolded eyes began to bleed, thin streams of black ichor dripping from their mouths. The priests cried out and fled, their chants broken. Pandemonium erupted. Courtiers rushed for the exits. The nobles closest to the dais scrambled away from Lyris as if she were aflame. She shrieked again, tearing the shattered crown from her head, her hair wild, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. From the alcove above, Cyril turned to flee, but the stairs were blocked by collapsing stone. Hands seized her arm. She gasped, only to find herself face to face with one of her mother's old guards, now gray-bearded but fierce as ever. "We're getting you out," he said. He and another led her through a hidden panel behind the alcove, down narrow stairs and through winding passages that smelled of old wine and damp stone. Behind them, the roar of confusion echoed as nobles shouted, guards barked orders, and Lyris's screams faded into the distance. They emerged into a courtyard half-shadowed by the storm overhead. Rain began to fall, strange heavy drops that smelled of metal. Cyril stopped breathless. What happens now? The older guard looked at her, his expression both grim and certain. The throne is broken. But the truth is not. She looked up at the palace towers, their banners flailing in the wind. What about Lyris? She asked. She'll flee. Or be taken. But her power is broken. And you? He paused. You are the only name still spoken with reverence by the old ones. Cyril swallowed. Her legs trembled. She felt the weight of something vast pressing against her chest. Not fear but destiny. We have to call the council, she said. They must see that there's another way forward. Not through force. But through truth. The rain fell harder. In the distance, a crack of lightning split the sky, and for a moment the storm lit up the horizon with eerie brilliance. She thought of her mother. Of the pendant. Of the garden hidden and blooming still. And of the seal that had shattered not in defiance but in justice. She was no longer the forgotten girl in the shadows. She was the name rising from the dust. And soon all would know. The garden had changed little over the years. It still bloomed behind the old chapel, hidden by ivy-covered walls and rusting iron gates, but its spirit had never faded. Cyril remembered following her mother here as a child, clutching her skirts while she harvested thyme and nettle, whispering to the leaves as though they could speak back. Now, the air carried a sacred stillness as if the ground itself waited to hear what would come next. The council of elders, those who had survived the chaos, who had not sworn themselves to Lyris's greed, stood in a loose circle around the fountain at the garden's center. Most were grayed with age, robes damp from the soft rain that still lingered after the storm. The shattered royal seal had been laid on a velvet cloth near a bed of marigolds, its jagged pieces wrapped in silk. Cyril stood before them, still dusty from her escape through the secret tunnels, still wearing the pendant that had started it all. We do not offer this lightly, Elder Marin said, stepping forward. He held a circlet of woven silver, much simpler than the bejeweled relic that had broken in Lyris's hands. The old ways have failed us. The gods have rejected the path we tried to force. You carry not only the blood of kings but the memory of a healer. We ask that you wear this crown not in a hall of stone, but here, in the place your mother once called sacred. Cyril looked down at the crown. It gleamed not with power but with purpose. No blood rituals, no chants, no thunder this time, only quiet conviction and truth unearthed. But she did not move forward. I will not wear it, she said softly, if it means becoming another who rules by fear. The council stirred. Elder Marin blinked. Child, you are the rightful heir. You. I know what I am, Cyril said, her voice gaining strength. But I also know what this kingdom has become. Titles have been given to flatter. Laws have favored the rich and crushed the poor. Healers like my mother were silenced. Girls like me were hidden. She looked up, eyes bright, defiant. If I am to wear this crown, then I must do so for more than inheritance. I will accept only if the council swears with me, here and now, that the laws will be rewritten. That justice will not bow to bloodlines. That voices like mine will never again be silenced. The wind stirred through the garden as if listening. Elder Renauld, oldest among them, stepped forward. And what laws do you speak of, Lady Cyril? Laws that protect the poor from land theft, she answered. That restore the rights of herbalists and midwives once labeled witches. That end the bride price tax. That allow daughters to inherit equally as sons. And laws that ensure any throne, garden or stone, must serve its people first. There was a long silence. Then Marin nodded. Slowly. You ask for change the old guard feared. And you? She asked. I feared it too once, he said. But I fear silence more. One by one the elders nodded. Not all enthusiastically. Some out of duty. Others out of weariness. But the wind shifted when they did, carrying the scent of lavender and soil. Cyril stepped forward. Elder Renauld held out the circlet, and Cyril, with no fanfare, no announcement, and no golden trumpet, bowed her head. As the silver crown touched her hair, something stirred, not in the sky, not in the earth, but in the garden itself. The herbs bloomed brighter. The trees seemed to lean in. From beneath the soil, a soft light pulsed, a reminder that even in death, her mother's care lingered here. You are now queen of the garden, Renauld said. Not by sword or seal, but by soil, truth and voice. Cyril lifted her head. I accept this crown, she said. But I wear it for those who cannot. The council bowed. Not in formality but in respect. Later, when the sky cleared and the last elders had departed through the winding garden gate, Cyril stayed behind. She knelt near the rosemary bush her mother had once prized and whispered a promise into the roots. I will not become what they were, she said. And I will not forget what you taught me. Behind her, the crown rested beside a journal filled with the first pages of rewritten law. And overhead, for the first time in months, the sun warmed the garden. The great hall of justice had never been so full, yet so silent. The walls, once hung with banners bearing the crest of the false queen, now displayed only one emblem, a simple silver crown wrapped in vines and blossoms, the new mark of Cyril's reign. The wooden benches overflowed with villagers, nobles, scribes and servants. They had all come for the same reason. Not for blood but for a reckoning. At the far end of the hall, in the throne once reserved for the monarch's decree, Cyril sat. She wore no jewels, no velvet robes. Only a pale green gown the color of wild herbs, and the silver circlet placed upon her head in the sacred garden. Her face was composed, solemn but not cold. She was not here to punish. She was here to restore truth. The guards led Lyris into the hall in silence. She had been held in the old eastern tower, no chains but no luxury either. Gone was the ornate finery she had once paraded in. Her hair, usually styled like a crown of flame, now hung loose and tangled. Her dress was plain and wrinkled, and her eyes darted between the rows of spectators. When she caught sight of Cyril, she faltered, her lip trembling. Cyril met her gaze without flinching. Elder Marin stood between them as the appointed voice of law. Lyris of House Wiener, he said, his voice echoing in the vaulted chamber, you stand accused of deception, coercion and misuse of royal rights. You claimed the throne under false lineage. How do you answer these charges? Lyris opened her mouth but for a moment no sound came out. Then she burst into tears. I didn't mean to, she sobbed. I didn't know. My mother told me I had the right. I was raised to believe it, trained since I was a child. It was never meant to be like this. Gasps and murmurs stirred from the crowd. Cyril remained silent. I only wanted to make her proud, Lyris went on, voice rising. I tried to be strong. Everything was so heavy and I was expected to carry it. She stopped abruptly and changed tone. But if anyone's to blame, it's them. The ones who advised me. The council who pushed the coronation. The priest who said the seal didn't matter. Why am I the only one standing here? She turned on the elders, her tears drying into fury. You used me. You knew what I was and still you crowned me. Elder Renaud did not reply. Neither did the others. Cyril raised her hand gently. The room fell quiet again. Lyris, she said, her voice calm, this trial is not to weigh every failure of the old court. That will come. Today is to answer the question of whether you knowingly claimed what was not yours, and what harm came of it. Lyris took a step forward but the guards stopped her. I didn't kill anyone, she said. I didn't raise an army. I didn't burn villages. I was just trying to be queen. And in trying, Cyril said softly, you let fear become your counsel and pride your guide. You banished good people. You burned records. You struck girls in the court for speaking too loudly. You threatened healers. You ordered the destruction of a family's legacy to protect your illusion. You called me a witch. The accusations hung in the air like thunderclouds. But I didn't kill you, Lyris whispered, a desperate edge in her voice. I didn't poison you. That's mercy, isn't it? Cyril rose from her chair. No, Lyris. That's cowardice. The court shuddered at her tone, not angry but steady like stone. You speak of burdens you were made to carry, Cyril continued. Do you think I carried none? I lived beneath the same roof as you. Watched my mother be erased from every page, her name struck from memory. I ate scraps while you wore silks embroidered with my birthright. And yet I do not stand here to watch you hang. Lyris's eyes widened. She had expected fury. She had braced for it. But she had not prepared for grace. I do not forgive easily, Cyril said, but I do not believe justice is the same as revenge. She turned to the gathered court. We have seen enough blood spilled under crowns. I will not spill more. Pause. Then she spoke clearly, her words rippling through the room. Lyris of House Wiener, for the deception and harm caused under your reign, you are hereby stripped of all titles and claims. You will be exiled beyond the northern ridge with provisions and safe passage. You will not return under threat of permanent imprisonment. The room erupted, not in applause but in low, startled gasps. Many had expected a noose. Others, at the very least, lifelong dungeon walls. But exile? Lyris stood frozen. Her mouth opened as if to protest, then closed. Her shoulders sagged. Guards stepped forward. Not harshly. They offered her a cloak, food, water. One bowed slightly as she passed. As she neared the doors, Lyris looked back, perhaps expecting Cyril to gloat, to smile, to show even a flicker of victory. Cyril did none of those things. She simply looked at her and said, "May you find something better in your next beginning." The heavy doors closed behind the false queen. The hall was still. Elder Marin stepped forward. "This judgment has been made public, witnessed by council, commoner, and crown. Let it be written, let it be remembered." Cyril turned, ready to step down, but someone in the crowd rose first. A young servant girl, perhaps 15, with soot on her cheek and tears in her eyes, bowed deeply. "Thank you," she said, voice trembling, "for seeing us." Then another stood. A baker. A guard. A healer. One by one they bowed, not to the power Cyril held but to the justice she had offered. It was not a coronation. It was a covenant. And in that moment the true reign of Queen Cyril began.